Welcome all. Let's see, it is officially 6:02. So, hello and welcome to this evening's Zoom webinar that's being produced by the Honors College at West Virginia University. This event is the fourth faculty fellow lecture taking place this fall semester. These lectures are designed to allow each Honors College Fellow an opportunity to provide an inside look into the innovative course they are currently teaching within the Honors College and will be teaching next spring semester. I'm Dr. Damian Clement, Associate Dean of West Virginia University's Honors College. Tonight's lecture is entitled Heritage Tourism by Dr. Meridith Balas. Dr. Balas is a service assistant professor in the Hardy Family Hospitality and Tourism program in the John Chambers College of Business and Economics. We will follow the standard Zoom webinar format this evening. After the presentation, we will host an open question and answer session. Since we are using the Zoom webinar platform for this lecture, before we begin, let me review some of the features that will help you experience this evening's lecture in the best way possible. If you have issues with audio or video at any point during the webinar, be sure to check your personal Zoom settings and your computer volume controls. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Due to enhanced security protocols, webinar attendees will not be able to see other questions, only their own. To ask a question, you must click on the Q&A button. A separate screen will appear. Then you may type your question. The presenter will answer all questions live at the end of the presentation. If live captioning has been requested, it can be viewed by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. If live captioning was not requested, a captioned version of this recording will be available at honors.wvu.edu. And now let's get started with this evening's lecture. So it is my pleasure to hand over the screen and the mic to Dr. Balas. Now that you can, yep, there it is.
All right. Damian, can you see and hear?
Yes,
Okay.
you are all set.
All right. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here with you all today. My name is Dr. Meridith Balas. I am a tourism professor here at West Virginia University, and like he said, I'm also the director of the Nemacolin Hospitality Lab. For those that are not familiar with that space, it's a student consulting center here in the Business College that is a partnership with a luxury resort about 45 minutes away called Nemacolin. So we will talk more about that later. But first, I want to share I have one of the coolest jobs in the world. I get to wake up every day and come to campus, a campus that I love, and teach students about something that I care deeply about. And so, in my role as a professor and also as a director of the lab, I really get to guide students as they explore what it means to work in hospitality and tourism. A lot of that through work with real businesses in our region, helping to solve hospitality and tourism related challenges. So before we dig into the content, I want to share a little bit with you about who I am. I have been to all 50 states. I have spent some time working for the Walt Disney Company. In my free time, I love exploring national parks and cultural or heritage sites, which, if you are not familiar with, hopefully you soon will be after this lecture. I'm also a certified travel advisor, which means I don't just study and teach tourism from an academic perspective, but I actually get to live that every day. I consider myself both a heritage and cultural tourist because wherever I go, I am personally seeking out the stories and the history and the identities of certain places. So our family motto at home is actually to take the trip. At our wedding, we gave out special luggage tags with that phrase on it because if you know me, or will soon get to know me, you will know that that is something that guides my travel and exploration practice. So if you ever come to office hours, I would love to tell you more about that. But tonight we're going to be talking specifically about Honors 207A, which is the course specifically about heritage tourism. And in that class, we ask some really big questions, and we discuss them through both in-class discussion and also lots of activities and field trips and simulations that help us all to better understand some of these sites around us. So questions like, what does it mean for a place to be authentic? Or how does tourism help to preserve culture or perhaps sometimes put it at risk? And what responsibilities do we have when we visit heritage sites all around the world? At the same time, this class is also about gaining some immersive experiences. So we travel to Falling Water, which is one of Frank Lloyd Wright's architectural masterpieces that is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So the students who take this class get to see firsthand how heritage, culture, and tourism intersect. So tonight, this short lecture is a sneak preview of the class. I want to introduce you to heritage tourism. I want to show you some examples, highlight what we cover during the semester, and also give you a taste of some of the ethical debates and hands-on experiences that students get in that class. So before we dive in, I want you to think about just for a second, what is the most memorable place that you have ever visited? I know that you're not able to put that in the chat, but if you just want to think about it for a moment, is it somewhere that is close to home? Is it somewhere on the other side of the world? I just want you to think about that because we're going to talk about a lot of places and tourism practices, and I'd like you to root that in a place that is particularly meaningful to you. And it can be meaningful because it is the beach that you grew up going to as a child and where you learned how to boogie board, or it could be the small town that you and your grandma used to get breakfast at every year that might not be special on a large scale, but is incredibly special to you. It might be a place that you have visited over and over again, taking your dog for a walk, that is just a place where you can be with nature. So all of that to say, think about some of those things, so that as we discuss many places tonight, you can root that in somewhere that was particularly relevant to you and memorable in your culture. So to start, let's talk about what is heritage tourism. We say that a lot. It's the title of this class, but what does it mean? For the most part, when we're referring to heritage tourism in the business, we're talking about travel that focuses specifically on history, culture, and identity. It's a type of travel that connects us to who we are and where we've come from. And when we're talking about this, it's important to know that it's not just sightseeing or just taking a photo in front of a landmark. It's about what that landmark means or what those sites are truly meaning that we're experiencing. It's about understanding the story of the place, the people who shaped it, and then, of course, the values that it represents, not just perhaps at that moment in history, but continue to represent over time. So for the folks that have taken any tourism classes with me, I also teach tourism management, you know that heritage tourism is a major part of the tourism industry. Globally, travel and tourism are some of the largest industries in the world. And for perspective, travel and tourism is larger than the farming industry here in the United States. So right here in West Virginia specifically, tourism contributes $8.7 billion to our economy. And within that, heritage tourism specifically is considered a high value segment. That means heritage travelers are known to spend more, stay longer, and engage more deeply with the places that they visit compared to, let's say, the average tourist or perhaps someone that is just passing through. So I want you to think about some examples that you might know, or perhaps some examples that are around a place where you grew up or visited often. Here in the eastern part of the United States, a lot of folks immediately think about visiting historic Colonial Williamsburg or visiting historic Gettysburg, right? A lot of those were like frequent field trip locations, or places that you can remember were stops on a family vacation where you also got a taste of history. For some, that might mean standing in front of the Statue of Liberty in New York City and like really feeling the weight of being in front of this symbol that might have been on a lot of your history books in elementary school. For some of our friends that have come from out west, driving along Route 66, stopping at all of the roadside attractions that tell the Americana story. And then heritage tourism also can involve sites that are recreated or staged. And we'll talk more about that. But to give you a good example, Disney's Epcot which is one of my favorite places, is a type of contrived heritage experience that still continues to draw millions of visitors each year and still continues to be a cultural and heritage location for a lot of people, even though that site was constructed fairly recently. So this leads us to one of the biggest questions that we wrestle with in this course, Honors 207A. Does tourism help to preserve culture, or does it sometimes put culture at risk? Or is it able to do both of those things at the same time? For instance, at Machu Picchu in Peru, the crowds are often so overwhelming that the government has to introduce ticket limits to protect the site. We talk about this frequently in this class and many hospitality and tourism classes. On the other hand, in many like smaller towns or let's say rural areas in West Virginia, heritage tourism can revitalize the local economy. It can provide jobs and it can preserve traditions that might have otherwise disappeared. So all of those things can potentially be true at the same time. So as we move on to the next slide, I do want you to think, do you think some of these types of tourism, like let's say over tourism at Machu Picchu, or perhaps a lot of local tourism to a small town that maybe needed it, does heritage tourism help or hurt the economy? There's no right answer. Just being aware of that concept is a big part of what we talk about in this class. So moving on to UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So this is something that you might not have ever heard of before, or you might be an expert, or you might have a UNESCO World Heritage Site bucket list, which if you do, I would love to follow up about that. So let's talk about one of the biggest players in the field of World Heritage and heritage tourism. So UNESCO is the United Nations cultural and scientific arm. And one of its key roles that is most popular is that it essentially gets to designate sites as being World Heritage Sites. So these are places specifically that are considered to have what we call outstanding universal value. And mean that to us, that means that their importance often goes beyond just one nation or one culture, and that they arguably matter to humanity as a whole. This number changes quite a bit, but typically there are about 1,200 World Heritage Sites that are recognized and existing around the globe. So you'll see on this slide here, I have quite a few. I'm sure that you can recognize some of these. Some of you might have visited some of these, but a few to mention in particular, I mentioned Machu Picchu in Peru. That's an ancient Incan city high in the Andes. A couple others that you might know, the Great Barrier Reef, the Great Wall of China, Stonehenge, as you can see here. But I want to say, yes, those are probably some of the most recognizable. But with 1,200 sites worldwide, there are a lot that you might not recognize from a photo, but might recognize from a reference in a book or something similar. So I want to note there are some sites that are in the United States that you might be familiar with. And there are several beyond just what we have on this slide. But here in the United States, we have some powerful examples of UNESCO designated sites. One being Yellowstone National Park, the very first national park in the world. If you ever see me walking around campus with a hat that is green with white letters, it has the year and also the crest from when Yellowstone National Park was established. That was both important to culture in the United States, but also culture globally, because it set the precedent for recognizing and protecting sites in this designation of a national park. You'll also see here the Statue of Liberty, Independence Hall in Philadelphia, where the Declaration of Independence was signed. And then here in the top right corner, we have one of Frank Lloyd Wright's architectural masterpieces. And Frank Lloyd Wright is someone who you might have heard of before. If you haven't, you will soon. Now that I am mentioning it today, I think that you will probably experience that phenomenon where on social media and maybe in some of your television ads, you'll start to hear mentions of Frank Lloyd Wright. Depending on who you ask, I think that universally, he's probably one of the only architects that most average non-architects could name, let's say. And he just happens to have designed some of the most famous homes in the world, one of which is just about 45 miles away from here, pictured here, called Balling Water. So this is, these United States sites, this is where things get a little bit complicated. The United States actually just recently announced that they will be leaving UNESCO next year. This is not an uncommon practice. It happens every couple years or every couple decades, depending on the political motivations and strategies of the current team in office. And so in class, this gives us a lot of content for discussion. There are lots of benefits and challenges to discuss. On one hand, stepping back from UNESCO allows the United States to save some membership fees, and it allows our government to avoid some political disagreements. But on the other hand, leaving can sometimes raise questions about what might happen to those UNESCO sites in the US. Will new United States sites continue to be nominated? And how does kind of cultural diplomacy, how is that affected when we step away from a global conversation about something that might matter? And so these are the types of things that we discuss a lot in Honors 207A. The politics of heritage tourism, the economics of global recognition, and often the ethics of who gets to decide what is and is not worth preserving. And it's complicated, I'll be honest. It's very complicated, but we get into some really great discussions in class, and there are many more to come. So actually, one of the exciting parts of the class is that students get to work in groups to pitch what they believe should be the next U.S. UNESCO World Heritage Site. They get to do a lot of research. They get to decide what would make the most sense from a cultural standpoint, from an economic standpoint, and really put themselves in the shoes of the decision makers related to UNESCO. So let's talk a little bit more about what we cover in this class. As much as I would love to say that we spend the whole class visiting heritage tourism sites, we do that, but from the comfort of our classroom in 302 Brooks Hall. But some of that class content, especially, it really mixes discussion, debate, and experience, all related to heritage demand and heritage tourism. And so a lot of times when we're talking about heritage demand and experience, we're saying, why do people seek out culture when they travel? What is it that motivates someone to stand in line for hours in the hot sun to see a site that is centuries old, right? We then talk about some of those U.S. heritage sites and the global examples so that we can compare how heritage is defined in one context, but perhaps defined quite differently, but equally important in another. We also, just this week actually, we study pop culture tourism. So, things like people visiting New York City to see Hamilton sites, things that have become suddenly much more relevant because of the popularity of the 2015 Hamilton musical. Or perhaps we're talking about fans traveling to Scotland and Stonehenge, even, as I mentioned, to visit frequently filmed locations in Outlander. Or it could be as simple as Elvis enthusiasts making pilgrimages to Graceland and going to Dollywood and having this really great time in that part of the United States, all because of their enthusiasm for Elvis. We talk about all of that in class and kind of how a particular book or movie or just moving scene in a TV show can spark an interest in someone to become a heritage and cultural tourist before they even know that they have that label. So another powerful part of this class, I will say, is this theme of dark tourism. And this is something that is complex. It seems negative, but in fact, that is just a term used in the tourism industry to talk about sites where some type of global disaster or some type of tragedy has occurred, often in a way to better understand it, or perhaps folks are traveling there to pay their respects. And this is very common. You might have participated in some dark tourism already without ever even knowing about it. So it could be as simple or complex as visiting sites like Ground Zero in New York, or visiting Auschwitz or Civil War battlefields here in the United States. And all of those motivations for the individuals who visit those places in a day will naturally be quite different, and we talk about that. But we often ask, what is it that is drawing people to those places, and how can the folks who operate those locations be as sensitive and welcoming and respectful as possible while continuing to tell stories that often can be quite tragic. So, as you might guess, if you are familiar with cultural tourism, we also spend time talking about religious tourism. So think folks that are visiting a particular site because they want to participate in some type of pilgrimage or a visit to a holy site, or quite often people traveling back to their ancestral roots. And then we also discuss sustainability and the future of tourism. We discuss that in all of our tourism classes here at WVU, but especially what does the balance between preservation and access mean? What does that look like? How can you find that balance while being socially responsible, but also fiscally responsible? And with that, we talk about the effects of tourism and the effects of over tourism and what responsibility travelers have when they are going to or simply taking up space in some of these heritage sites. And so on the right here, you can see what some of our assignments might look like. This is not an exam-based class, but more so a class that is designed to help you really connect with what you determine your perspective to be on heritage and cultural tourism. And so we present a lot of sites, a lot of ethical dilemmas, and it's up to you to decide kind of where you fall and how you want to deepen your relationship with heritage and culture through the lens of some of the experiences in this class. So each week, students complete short reflections or case studies. These are often applied and discussion focused, not so much long research papers. They really help our class to engage with what we're reading and connect it to the real world, even if, like I said, we're not able to get to that physical site. Students also participate in a big assignment in the middle of the semester. It's coming up for this group called the UNESCO Site Simulation. This is, to me, one of the highlights of the class. Students get to role play as committee members debating whether or not a specific site might deserve UNESCO status, or they might be a part of a community playing different roles of people who have very different and conflicting opinions about whether or not to seek out UNESCO site designation. And so those students get to practice making their arguments. They get to weigh the cultural value against economic and political pressures. And then they ultimately get to vote as a group. And then for the final project, students get to completely from the ground up design and analyze a specific type of cultural tourism journey. And so that means with a specific budget and specific motivation, the groups work to choose a destination, and they map out in entirety its heritage touch points and evaluate what the impact will be for those travelers and also for the site from a cultural, economic, and ethical standpoint. It's a really cool project. And one of those that is, it teaches you something about yourself as you are participating in the project, but it is also something that teaches me many things as an instructor. So, and of course, I have to mention that this class has a field trip to Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. If you haven't had a chance to become familiar with Falling Water yet, I highly recommend a quick Google or some of the PBS documentaries about it. There's a great Ken Burns film out there about Frank Lloyd Wright's work. This is, without a doubt, one of the most influential architects in our time, and we get to go in this class and see his work firsthand. So that field trip is actually coming up next week. So if you know any students in the class, I would recommend taking a look for some of those photos on LinkedIn. So one thing that we talk about a lot in this class is just, not necessarily just for the United States, but what does it say about the United States and about us as a society, which sites we are choosing to protect and elevate to a global stage, and perhaps the unspoken part of that question, which would be what necessarily are those things that are said about the sites that we decide to not protect and elevate. So that leads a lot to, like I had mentioned earlier, some of these ethical questions that we tackle in class. Like I said, we don't solve any of these, but we talk about them quite a bit. And so we talk a lot about authenticity. So for instance, if a historic village is rebuilt for visitors, is it still authentic? There's no right answer, but we have to consider, does that reconstruction turn it into something less real and something more of a performance than perhaps preservation? Or does that matter at all because that site is continuing to teach people about an era or an event or a specific cultural group of people that matter? Um, these are, I mean, they're all hard questions. And then we talk a lot about sustainability, like I mentioned, over tourism. How many tourists are too many? And what is the tipping point? At what point does visitor traffic start to harm that very site that people are coming to see? If any of you visited a U.S. national park during the earliest parts of the COVID pandemic, I would imagine that you, like myself, experienced over tourism in real time. And it was concerning. There were so many folks crowding these places that were not ready for or, had a prepared infrastructure to welcome. And it really made us all question what the impact was on the ecosystem and the wildlife and the local community when they weren't ready for that high volume of tourists to come through. We talk as well about cultural ownership. So when you're thinking about a historic site, let's say, who is it that has the right to tell that community's story? Is it the community itself? Is it the government? Is it the tourism industry? And how do those different storytellers and their perspectives change the way a place is represented? Are any of those voices more valuable than others? And like I said, we continue to ask questions about over tourism. Is it ethical or is it not to have visitor numbers be capped to protect certain sites, even if that means saying that some travelers who really want to be there won't be able to be there on that day because the park is at capacity? The questions aren't just abstract, though. We use a lot, especially in the case study assignments, we use a lot of real world examples to bring these to life. So, for instance, in Venice, we know, for those that pay attention to any kind of tourism news, local officials have long debated whether or not to ban or limit large cruise ships that flood the city with visitors, right? They can damage the environment, they can overwhelm the residents, but they can also bring in a significant amount of weekly revenue that boosts the local economy. On a similar note, in Hawaii, we know that for a long time, Native Hawaiian groups have pushed back a call against what some of them refer to as faux luau's, saying that they are commercialized versions that misrepresent or might disrespect their traditions. There are some folks who argue on the other side of that say that even if they are a representation of something that may or may not be completely authentic, it's still a step in a direction towards exposing traveling tourists to a type of culture that they might not have been familiar with before. So each of these cases and the case studies in our class really force us to think carefully about what tourism means, who it benefits, and who or what animals might be harmed in the process. So the cool part about this class is that you don't just hear these questions from me, you get to debate them with your peers and you get to connect to them with your readings and case studies. And whether intentional or not, I think over the course of the semester, really consider your role as a traveler, as a community member, as a part of a specific culture. And those conversations are what becomes some of the most lively parts of the semester because there are no easy answers. And that's, I think, what can often make this subject so fascinating. Uh-oh. Well, there should be 3 beautiful photos here of Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. I'm not sure what has happened to them, but like I said, one of the most exciting parts of this course is that you don't just have to read about Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. You actually get to go out and experience it for ourselves, experiencing a UNESCO World Heritage Site and the general concept of cultural and heritage tourism, all in one field trip that takes place within an hour from here. And so, for those that aren't familiar, like I said, Falling Water is a masterpiece of Frank Lloyd Wright. It is one who is arguably one of the most important American architects. He believed in something that Falling Water exemplifies quite well, which is this concept of organic architecture. So, this notion that buildings are designed in harmony with their natural surroundings. Falling Water, which is built directly on top of a waterfall, with these terraces that extend out like rock ledges, I guess, and then these windows that open directly into a forest. It's just designed in absolute harmony with its natural surroundings, which is really cool. Falling Water is one of several sites that are designated in Frank Lloyd Wright's portfolio as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So some of you might have seen or heard of some of his others. Some of the perhaps more famous ones would be the Guggenheim Museum in New York City. It's a big white building with a spiral ramp that feels more like you are walking through the sculpture than through a traditional gallery. Taliesin is a place in Wisconsin and Taliesin West in Arizona, both which served kind of as his architectural schools and homes that exist in a very cool way to be displayed today. In the Roby House in Chicago is another one that exemplifies Frank Lloyd Wright's prairie style. And so, why are these sites specifically designated, and how are those similar to sites like the Great Barrier Reef or Stonehenge or Machu Picchu? They're all a part of this group of Frank Lloyd Wright's work is all a part of one designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site because it changed the way that the world thinks about modern architecture, and that had an impact very much on certain regions and certain cultures in our history, as well as the blueprint of many buildings. So when students get to visit Falling Water, they get a chance to take a guided tour inside and outside of the house, learning how Wright kind of blends those designs with nature. They also get to participate in group reflections, and then they have lunch at our nearby luxury resort called Nemacolin, which is a really important part of the travel and tourism ecosystem around the folks that are going on UNESCO World Heritage Site bucket list tours, or for folks exploring the Laurel Highlands during a visit to Falling Water. And so the students who get to go up there next week actually get to hear from a UNESCO World Heritage Site expert in talking about why that site was selected and specifically what they have to do to ensure that they're maintaining that designation and being respectful of the amount of tourists that can come and go from the house to ensure that site remains a place that can be visited for many years to come. And so Falling Water, like many of these sites, really helps to make these ideas more tangible and bring us out of the reading and the debate in the classroom, but really helps us to get to know it. If this is your first time hearing about Falling Water, I hope that you will ask your friends and family about it and see if anyone else has heard of it, because I do think that it tends to be one of those most recognizable homes and is a high on the bucket list item for a lot of folks that travel to see specific sites. So I want to leave you with a clear sense of what this class is really about. And so, as I said, Honors 207A, we talk about travel and culture and ethics and the economy, often all at the same time. It's really hard to look at these things in isolation. And so that's why we study often how they overlap and how they shape the way that we all experience the world. And so, like I said earlier, students in this class don't just learn by reading. They have a chance to debate and simulate real world decisions, and then, of course, experience some heritage sites firsthand. So when students leave this course, it's always my hope that they leave with a deeper appreciation of how heritage shapes the world, not just in the far off places like the Great Wall of China, but here in our own region. And so my hope is that as you gain more information and exposure, you'll start to see that you travel differently and experience culture differently and really connect with your role as a traveler in a different and more enhanced way. And so, I would be interested to hear at some point what it is that might excite you about a class like this. And I'm excited to entertain some questions. But before we do that, if you take a look at the slide, there are opportunities to take this class in the spring semester. If I know that this class filled pretty quickly last year, or excuse me, for this semester. So if this is something that interests you, please register when you're able to. And if there seems to be a wait list, let me know and we'll see if we can work something out. Whether you take the class or not, you are always welcome to come to my office hours. My office is on the third floor of Reynolds Hall. So if you are ever coming off of the PRT on Beechhurst and you cross the Sky Bridge, my office is like pretty much one of the first rooms on the left when you enter that building. I also want to encourage you to, if you're interested, get involved with the hospitality and tourism culture here in the Nemacolin Hospitality Lab. That lab is a student consulting center, like I mentioned, and we are always taking volunteers to join in on some projects. We have a lot of folks who work in there who aren't necessarily hospitality majors or minors, but folks who are just interested in potentially applying their own discipline in the hospitality and tourism context. And so for a lot of you, you're on a career path that absolutely could be a career path that leads you to do that specific discipline, but do it in the sphere of hospitality and tourism management in, let's say, a national park or for a global tourism company. Your office could potentially not just be an office with four walls, but you could be exploring different sites and countries and national parks all the time. So if that interests you, let me know. I also am always eager to talk about books and movies and travel recommendations. I have had a very fortunate ability to get to many places on my bucket list, and of course, have created many more for myself. But if you are just dipping your toes in the water of creating some bucket lists for yourself to travel with, I would love to talk to you about those and see what types of pop culture tourism I can help you get to, or what movies to watch and what books to read that might connect you to some of these places that you might one day visit. So with that, I would love to answer any questions that you have or elaborate on some of the things that I have discussed here tonight.
Nice job, nice job. Now I realize that I butchered your name
Oh,
in the beginning, so I am profoundly sorry for that. I should have asked, but I didn't. So okay, so we have some questions here. Would Japan tongues in California count as a contrived heritage tourism?
I am not familiar with that site, but I can absolutely look that up and get back to you tonight. I will say this though. So, contrived heritage and cultural tourism sites, a lot of times are in the eye of the beholder. And so, I can always use Disney's Epcot as an example. Visiting the Eiffel Tower in Paris in Epcot at Walt Disney World to a lot of people is not an authentic experience because they would, in that mindset, believe that the real Eiffel Tower in Paris in France might be what they determine as authentic. But I will say this, there are a lot of people who still are teary-eyed when they see the Eiffel Tower in Paris in Epcot, because that might be the closest that they ever become to experiencing Parisian culture, and it might be authentic to them, and that's okay too. And so I say that I spent several years I spent a long time working in Epcot. So I have a lot of experience with that bit of the World Showcase, but each person defines how authentic a site is to them. And I think that's the most important part.
Good. Next question, since UNESCO is part of the UN, does that mean cultural heritage sites only apply to UN nations?
That's a great question. This continues to shift as global politics shift. So you will see that there are many different UNESCO World Heritage Sites that maintain their designation but are not connected, let's say, with UNESCO. And haven't been for a very long time. So I can't answer that specifically for one instance, but they shift with time as we can see here that the United States is stepping in and stepping out.
Okay. Do museums count as tourism, as even if they aren't always a specific site, they are collections of items from sites that brings people?
That's a great question.
That's a good question.
So to me personally, as a traveler, I believe that museums are cultural tourism. Because if I am going into a space and learning about a cultural event or a group of people or a particular region, I am expanding my knowledge and hopefully connecting to that culture in some way. And so to me as a tourist, I would say yes. But if you consume tourism differently and consume culture differently, then that's, I think, up to you to potentially define that.
All right. What GEF does this fulfill? I can answer that. That's the easy part there.
I think
Uh,
it's
I
seven, right?
I think it's seven. Yes, it's seven. I would love to take this class as someone who majors in landscape architecture.
We would love to have you.
Just a comment. It was just a comment then. Oh, what is one place that has culturally impacted you personally?
That is a great question. Um, I would say um to me in particular the where the Seneca Falls Convention was in the state of New York. It's in Seneca Falls, New York. It's where some of the earliest movements related to women's suffrage and women's right to vote. The site itself is very small. It's like an empty schoolhouse on a downtown street in Seneca Falls, New York. But to be in that space and to know the barriers that people faced to even sneak out of their homes to get to that meeting, to then talk about some things that wouldn't come into the light of day for many years after. It felt very powerful to me specifically to be in that space and realize that in our history classes, we're often taught about that concept, and it feels like it was a long time ago, but being in that space made me realize just how recent it actually was. And so I think about that quite a bit.
Cool. What's your favorite place you've visited?
Um, Gosh, it's so hard to choose. I would say um, the Liguarian Sea in Italy, which sounds very, very niche and very specific, but there's a region called Cinque Terre in Italy that's a collection of small villages right along that sea. It was an add-on at the last minute to a train trip that I was taking last year, actually, and it was like kind of an impromptu, let's just stop here. People have said that it's cool. I could not have ever imagined how beautiful and how special that place ended up being to me and how um you know it does not have very many modern amenities. And so to be able to really step back and connect with a much more simple lifestyle in one of the most beautiful vistas I have ever seen was a really special experience. And I am hopeful that I can get back there here in the next couple years.
Uh, do you think there are specific places that should be better preserved for history and conversation?
Um, that's that's a hard question to answer, but I will say I do think that we could be collectively prioritizing this more. But at the same time, I will say if you ever have a free moment, check out the list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the United States. It's very easy to Google. There's also a waiting list that I recommend taking a look at. Um, it's very fascinating to see probably some places that you have visited on some field trips and things, or like they might be close to your hometown and it might be a site that you have overlooked. And it's very fascinating to see some sites on that list and think to yourself, oh, I might not have chosen that. Or oh wow, maybe that place near my hometown is a lot more insightful than I gave it credit for. And so it's really interesting to look specifically in the US if that's where you're from. To look at those sites and put them into context of your knowledge and experience here in the United States, and really see what sites have already been prioritized and perhaps what sites are missing that you think should be on that list.
Okay, let's see here. Do you think specific places there should be? What is the, no, you answered that. What is the one place you've never visited that you want to?
I want to visit South Africa in the worst way. South Africa and also some parts of South America, especially that require some physical training before making the trip. Um, um, those are, I promise that I will get there. I'm not sure that I will get there in the next, 2 or 3 years. But I will say this for anyone that is like, I don't know, you all are, I'm sure, at different parts on your travel journey. Write down today a place that you want to go before you turn 25 or before you turn 30, and put it up somewhere so that you can see that that is a goal that you have, and it will become a part of that manifestation mentality where you are framing some of your decisions about, oh, I really want to buy this new thing that came out, but like, would I rather be able to cross that place off my bucket list in a couple years if I save that money? I was able to do that in order to get to all 50 states, and I don't regret it for a second. There's so much to see even here um, in our own country where we're currently studying, and I can't wait to see now all of the things beyond the 50 states. But it was, had I not identified that goal in a timeline for myself, I will be honest, like I would not have been able to do that before I turned 30.
Okay, wow. So this is a good one. You mentioned that the United States often enters and withdraws from UNESCO depending on the current administration. What does that process look like when a country enters or withdraws?
So I can't speak to the specifics that kind of the um, that President Trump's level of decision making for that, but I can say this. We talked a lot in class this semester about what that decision in August meant. The sites were given notice in the United States that we wouldn't be a part of UNESCO anymore, but the sites would continue to maintain their UNESCO designation. But what that means now for them is that probably they are having to make some budget projections. Was there any funding that they were receiving that was either indirectly or directly related to that designation? And if so, what can they do in the next year with this runway to prepare for potentially those budget cuts, or perhaps a slight decrease in visitors because the United States is no longer a part of UNESCO? And so there are some of those more financial decisions that folks have to make and really plan for. They might be applying for grants. They might be slimming down on their staff. They might be saying, well, we usually allow 300 visitors a day. Unfortunately, we can only afford the plumbing now for 100 visitors a day. These are all just hypotheticals, let's say, but I will encourage you to think about this. Let's say they are having to make some of those hard decisions. Let's say they go from 500 visitors a day to 200 visitors a day. How does that then impact the local restaurant that is the place where you have to stop and get a burger when you are visiting this site? How does that impact the workers of that burger restaurant and how they are able to continue to afford their homes, right? There's a chain reaction as it relates to local and global tourism in that capacity that is a big part of considering kind of that bigger economic picture.
Oh, good answer. Uh, Interesting question here. What are the requirements for something to qualify as a UNESCO heritage site?
Let me go back a few slides. So we can get more into the specifics, but here on this slide, the last selection process was where I pulled this data from. It can change a little bit from time to time. But there are 10 criteria. 6 of those are related to the cultural standpoint, and then 4 are related to natural. So you'll see here, there's a category about the masterpiece of human creative genius, testimony to a cultural tradition, and then there are some specifically related to the natural. So, what is the significance of that biodiversity, let's say? And that's why you can have a site that is the Great Barrier Reef and it is designated just as Machu Picchu, which is designated just as officially as Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And so, while those 3 sites specifically do not generally have much in common, when you break it down to some of that criteria, you can see that they do have some things that then become globally relevant in their preservation over time.
Okay, cool. What's one surprising thing that people don't realize about heritage tourism?
um, I think traveler motivation in heritage tourism can be really complex. And so, especially when you're talking about some of those dark tourism aspects, at any given moment, let's say you're at one of those sites where a particularly awful tragedy occurred. At any given moment at that site, there could be one person there mourning a family member. And there could also be someone there celebrating the political gains that happened at that site because they connect to them on a political level. And both of those tourists have a space to be there. And so, how does a heritage and cultural tourism site specifically prepare the narratives and the infrastructure and the people who are working there to be able to guide both of those people on a special experience through the tour? And so I think what is surprising is that most folks, when you go into a site, assume that everyone else is there for the same reason as you are. And I think as we break down some of these sites, particularly some of the controversial sites that might be designated or might not, that's something that I think can be hard to understand, but then I think hopefully becomes something that you think about and are aware of often.
This is a good one. Is there an instance, in your opinion, that tourism has done more harm than good in a region?
Please come to our class because yes, I actually so this past semester I taught a group of mostly upperclassmen in tourism management. And I taught them many concepts in this class. It's one of my favorite classes to teach. Um, but of all of the things that I taught them, they particularly remembered what the impact of the cruise line industry is on um, global communities, not just environmental ecosystems, but also the ports where they are docking. And so I won't get into any specifics, but we have lots of them. And this is not me saying to not take a cruise. They are also a very important sector of the travel and tourism economy. But I think that a lot of times, if you don't want to pay attention to some of those more negative aspects of tourism and the impact on the environment, you could easily ignore them. But I'm hopeful that in taking some of my classes, you're able to consider both the impact, positive or negative, and also what it means for the economy. I will say, there's a set of stairs in Spain, actually, that almost lost its UNESCO designation because it was featured too many times in film and television.
Movies, yeah. I've been there. It's in where is it at? No, I'm thinking about a different set of stairs.
I know. I don't want to tell you the wrong specific set of stairs, but there are a few actually that are contested. But there's one in particular that has now become so heavily trafficked by pedestrians and pop culture tourists, that UNESCO said that if that site does not specifically limit the amount of human traffic on those stairs, it will no longer be designated because the stairs will no longer exist. And so obviously the flip side of that is that the local economy and all of the hotels and restaurants and small businesses probably benefit greatly from those stairs being featured in television and movies so often. but there has to be some type of balance, right, where we're either limiting it or perhaps choosing a different set of stairs next time.
Here's a good one. I am from around the New River Gorge. Do you think that heritage tourism would be beneficial for the New River Gorge? I know it has bought the area a lot of money, but I have seen more and more damage to the trails and water as a result.
That is a very hot topic in hospitality and tourism at the moment. Let me say a couple things. One, a lot of folks might overlook the New River Gorge as a specifically heritage and cultural site. But for those who are familiar with the region, know that the coal mining communities and the culture that exists as a result of that is an incredibly important part of heritage tourism in West Virginia and in the United States. And so I'm hopeful that the heritage aspects of tourism in the New River Gorge are not overlooked for that reason. But I will say this. When the New River Gorge was redesignated from a national river and forest to a national park, it's incredible, right? Lots of new opportunities, lots of travelers to boost the local economy. But that designation as a national park did not come with any additional funding. And so naturally, the New River Gorge has to do more to prepare for and welcome those crowds, to ensure that the infrastructure is maintained, to ensure that folks are safe, without additional resources to do so. And that in itself can pose a particularly ethical dilemma.
Mm.
If anyone was paying attention to the news a couple months ago, there were some budget cuts and staff limitations, staff reductions in the U.S. Department of the Interior, which is what essentially oversees the National Park Service. As a result of that, the New River Gorge had to eliminate some of its staff members. And they're not able to rehire those staff members for, I think it's at least 1 year or 2 years. They cannot rehire immediately as a result of those government slim downs. And so I am not saying that those slim downs were not necessary to make money for something else, but I want you to consider the implication of a park here in West Virginia that only a couple years ago received its designation and suddenly an influx of travelers, but has had decreasing resources to maintain it since then. And in that scenario, right, how does a park like that continue to operate? Come to one of my classes and I will tell you.
Wow, wow, lots of stuff here. But it's 6:58 and I like to get people out at 7. So students, we appreciate the opportunity to visit with you this evening. If you have if you have additional questions about the course, please feel free to reach out to Dr. Balas. How do I say it?
It's either one, Balas,
Oh,
Balas.
Balas, okay. At meredith.balas@mail.wvu.edu. An archived version of this webinar will be available on the Honors College website. Thank you for spending your time with us this evening. Meredith, thank you for sharing about your class. It seems like there's interest, lots of really good questions. So I have no doubt that you're going to get a lot of students in that class next spring.
I hope so. I hope so. If not, it might become a permanent class in the business college. So
Hey, well,
stay
that
tuned
works
for
as well. Well,
that.
have a good evening. Have a good field trip on Friday. And students, everyone, have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.